is Ray, and we are here to talk about betrayal trauma, not just share our experience as professionals who work in this industry, but also as betrayed ourselves. Last week, we talked about the 3 stages of trauma resolution, and we spent some time talking about safety and stabilization, which is the first phase of trauma resolution. And today we thought that our topic should be about the grief and mourning phase of trauma resolution. And what that encompasses is processing the trauma, expressing emotions, and finding meaning in the experience. So that's a lot.
Mm-hmm. It is a whole lot, and it's often where we do so much of the connecting the dots. Like when we're first in that state of crisis, after discovery or after rediscovery, there is so much blur. There is so much just shock. There's so much that shuts down in us, and it takes time for that to open and unpack enough to be able to figure out what it all actually means, what the actual impact of all of that is, for the duration, and then to figure out what the heck are we going to do with it once we know what it is.
You're right. It is so complicated in the beginning when the rug has been pulled out from underneath you. Your world, as you saw it and knew it, is suddenly something different. And the work that you do in the beginning phases is to stabilize your ability to move forward and find safety in your new reality. Then you have the task of choosing to share what's happening, process your feelings, and find that meaning. I find that sharing the feelings is pretty easy because you've been so gut punched that you can't help but share your feelings. But sharing the feelings underneath the feelings can get a little tricky. Right. And I think the hardest part of this phase is finding the meaning. So connecting the dot and finding the meaning. What are some of the things that you think are most important during this time for folks that are watching us that feel like, okay, I'm pretty stable now, I'm pretty steady. What do I do now?
Yeah. So it's interesting. The first thing that comes to my mind is a matter of judgments, judging ourselves for how we feel about what's going on, or judging ourselves for the choices that we're making in response to how we feel about what's going on. I find that a lot of that is our internal sense of how we feel about our own lives, as well as our inferred sense of what other people might be thinking about us or our circumstances. So that seems like an awfully lot to manage all by itself. And I think the reference points for that are present time, like what we're actually hearing, seeing, feeling, sensing, talking about, but it also brings up a lot of historical reference points to why we think and feel the way we do about what's going on and the choices that we're making in response to it.
So I heard 2 things that I want to comment on what you just said. One of the things that's really hard to do, which we often are telling our clients, is stick to the facts, right? Just the facts, Jack. That inference, that fear of being judged, that need to take it personally so that maybe we can do something about it, that rises, I think, in all of us. And so really to stick to the facts of what's happened, like one of the most important facts that we talk about is that the women that we work with, you showed up. You showed up every day. You showed up with your best intentions. You poured your heart and soul into your marriage. And the reality that you created for yourself within the relationship was true. The second thing that I heard you say reminds me of something that Sarah Morales talks a lot about, and I wish Sarah were here. She works with Ray and I a lot. And she talks about that curious why, not the judgmental why.
Mm-hmm.
And for us to be able to employ the glasses of curiosity instead of judgmental, especially when it comes to looking at the whys and hows and whens of our lives.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is such an intricate piece of healing.
It is. And so often we remind ourselves that trauma responsivity, the energy attached to that, it tends to be black and white, it tends to be very all or nothing. And so we often translate that into we only have one choice or a different choice. It's got to be this way or that way. But there's so much in that exploratory curiosity involved in what else could be possible. What other options do I have? Could that mean something different or something adjacent to the way that I've been interpreting or understanding or experiencing this?
We talked about last week how important it is to be in a community.
Mm.
And I think that the reality testing, the grounding, the discovery about who you are and how you want to be in the world is so important within a community in this phase of trauma resolution as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, having someone else to be able to see what you're expressing or experiencing from a slightly different angle or vantage point, that third party external perspective. I will never forget one of my favorite mentors always says, you can't read the label from the inside of the jelly jar. So while there's a lot to be said for understanding your life from the inside out, there's also a lot to be gained from seeing it from the outside in.
I'm thinking about how the person whose external vision was most important to me during that time was, of course, the man who had hurt me.
Hmm.
Obviously, he didn't see me the way I wanted to be seen. He didn't love me the way that he said he did. How do you process through that when there's been infidelity?
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because we'll talk a lot about distorted reality and distorted views. And I think that's so often the case, whether it's someone who's had an affair and has compared you to a partner, or someone who views pornography excessively or objectifies everything that moves, that sense of there is a distortion to that lens that can be restored.
Mhm.
And I think it happens multidirectionally. I know how much I began viewing myself through that distorted lens. It
Yes.
wasn't just my partner who looked at me that way, and it wasn't just how I looked at him. There was a lot of distortion that went on there, and a lot of restoration that needed to happen to see things as accurately and clearly as they needed to in order to heal. Like going back to your comment about it being about the facts, truth heals after
Yeah.
deception. And so that truth is such a critical part of getting our bearings during this loss, grief, and mourning process.
Mhm. I think that talking about the reason why that distortion happens could be really important. And I think about what it's like to live in a relationship where there's a second story, there's a secret, there's an addiction, whatever it is, you're living with something that you didn't know you were living with. And your beliefs and thoughts and actions are all touched by that.
Mm.
I recognized early on that I had sacrificed so much of what was important to me to be in relationship, how I had sacrificed so much of who I was, who I wanted to be, the way I wanted to be, the way I wanted to parent, the way that I wanted to live in order to deal with the unknown, this energy, this entity that had also joined our marriage.
I think of that sometimes in terms of what I call opportunity cost, that sense of what it took to be able to try and function while
Mhm.
there was this absolute black hole, if you will, of integrity and honesty and clarity happening within my marriage. I remember sitting on the couch and saying, something feels wrong. Something feels very, very, very wrong. And trying to figure out whether I was going to believe that intuition that said something was wrong or believe what I was being told that everything was fine, that all by itself consumed so much of me that frankly would have been really productive and valuable and useful in the life I was trying to live.
Yes. Yes.
And we feel emotions of grief about that. And we express our experience in mourning about that because it's not a small deal, because it is such a big thing. One of the things I think you asked me what comes up when I think about the loss, grief, and mourning part of this is how much pressure we feel externally and internally to hurry up and get over this. Partly because it's so uncomfortable. We don't want to sit in it any longer than we have to. And I don't want anyone to sit in it any longer than we have to because it's miserable at times. But there is something to be said for giving it the expression of loss and the recognition of that loss that it really deserves because of the enormity that it
Yes.
represents.
Yes. The life that you chose is not the life that you got
Mhm.
through no fault of your own. A colleague of ours started an organization called Not a Casserole Widow, Kim Henson. And I love the premise that people know how to help other people grieve loss. For betrayal, the loss is huge, and our society is not equipped to deal with it.
And I want to say, you just said our society isn't really equipped to deal with it. I want to also add a voice of hope to say, I think we're getting better at it. I think we
Mm,
are having important conversations. I think COVID did a lot for that, getting us talking about the ambiguity of loss and grief that isn't only about the losses we suffer due to death. So I think we're growing in that arena, but as always, the work remains active and growing.
you are so smart to bring that up because it is so true. And ambiguity is such a great word because how do you explain the grief and loss to someone who maybe has not experienced anything like what happened?
Sure.
I was having a conversation with a friend and she said to me, I'm sorry I didn't know what was happening.
Mm.
I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I didn't understand what was happening. And her ability to address it now, unfortunately, is because of her circumstances.
Mm.
And I turned to her and I said, being betrayed, sexually betrayed, is a class all its own. And unless you've lived it, you really have a hard time understanding it and the choices that you might want to make within the solutions that you choose. Is it appropriate during this phase of the trauma resolution to share the grief and loss with the person that caused it or created it? That's a question that we get a lot.
Mhm.
And I would be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh my gosh, my brain is going in a million different directions as it always does when you ask super smart questions. I want to say, and it might seem like a cop out, but I want to say yes and no. I want to say best of both. I want to say there is a justice and a potential for the rightness of repair when our partner who has responsibility for creating this loss can hear it and does hear it and will witness it. And I think there is a limit to the experiential understanding and empathy that is different than the capacity for that we get from someone else who's experienced it from the same vantage point.
Yes. So share it with the community that you found. You're going to find your very best support there because they know exactly what it feels like. And if you are working toward healing your marriage, healing your relationship, this shared mourning piece absolutely has to happen. It may not be the right timing. That is up to each individual couple, but it is a piece of this that has to happen. And even if the relationship is not surviving, having the opportunity to share your feelings about what has happened with the person who was responsible is really, really important. Mm-hmm. I love Sweet James when he talks to other partners and he says things like, I hear you. And he always says, and I cannot completely understand what it feels like. And we have learned working with men all of these years in the different stages of their recovery as well. We have learned that if we can find different betrayals in different points of their lives that may or may not be relational or sexual, but if we can begin to string those betrayals together for them, they can feel, they can have that visceral sense of loss, mm-hmm. and begin to create some empathy for what has happened.
Yeah. And really, when it comes to this work, we use as many reference points as we possibly can. We use as many points of connection and recollection as possible to start to begin a more shared narrative experience with our partners. What brings to mind one of the quotes that I read once about couples mourning together is to remember that we're in this together, but we're in it differently.
Yes.
We're in this together, but we're in it differently. I remember listening to couples, for example, who'd lost a child and they were mourning the same loss. It wasn't a situation like betrayal where one was the perpetrating party and one was on the other end of it, but they were still experiencing the fact that one of them may have their biggest, deepest waves of emotion about the loss happen on day 32. And for someone else, it might happen on day 322. There's just different ways of responding to even a shared experience of loss that has so much to do with history and personality and support and all kinds of different variables. We see that a lot in our couples.
Yeah, we do. We also see that capacity sometimes can be judged. And so I think that this might be a good place to say you get to pull out the curious whys instead of the judgmental whys and look at why is it that my partner cannot grieve in the same way or the same depth or the same breadth that I am grieving here, instead of taking it personally, using it to attack yourself of why am I wallowing around in bed and he's off playing golf. Really to understand that we all have different capacity and different timetables.
And one of the gifts that we get to see as helping professionals is watching those capacities grow. Mm-hmm. Even between partners, one partner to another, that capacity for shared experience, for tolerance for each other's experience, for increasing connectivity there between two partners. It's a beautiful thing to watch. It's a beautiful thing to witness. It's certainly a beautiful thing to live.
Yes, we certainly feel honored for the work that we get to do. All of us at CORE, and certainly Ray in our own work, and all of the other coaches that we know and love and therapists that we know and love that are in this arena. It's a calling for all of us. Mm-hmm. And I think we're always going to be saying, find hope, find help, find the people that can help you through whatever phase of this you are in, because this is not something to traverse on your own. Mm-hmm. And watching podcasts, as wonderful as they can be, isn't going to give you the interaction and the support that you need to get better.
I was actually this morning listening to James and Sam in one of their episodes talking about how these conversations that we have on whether it's Ask the Unfaithful or Ask the Betrayed are starting points. They might be able to crystallize or communicate or clarify something that's important that then we take back to our own individual corners of our own lives and really process with the people that have more dimension and more interaction with us, but to have a starting place, we've all got to start somewhere for something. And then there are so many layers of it that we unpack in a really unique and personal firsthand way.
Yes. I think we might have time today to talk about that finding meaning in the experience piece of this phase. And I was thinking about what does that mean? And certainly it means to acknowledge and to work toward integrating what has happened and adapting to a new reality. But we know from all of the work that we've done all of these years that it is creating that new sense of self that is the real gold mine in this piece.
What do you mean by that?
So, learning really, who am I? Who have I wanted to be and I have not been? Who do I want to be in this moment? One of my hallmark questions is always, who do you want to be in this moment? Because it really defines how you're going to move forward. How do I want to feel about what's happening in this moment? And how do I want to handle it? So, who do I want to be? I recognized early in my journey, and I'll say it over and over again, that I really didn't like who I was in juxtaposition to the life that I was leading. I had adopted parts that really weren't mine. They were shame and guilt of someone else's. They were reactions to things I didn't know were happening. And to really focus on, how do I want to respond to the world? What values and desires and dreams do I have as a person? I really was very good at taking care of other people's needs and not looking at what I needed and what I wanted. And maybe between you and me, I still sometimes struggle with that, although I work really hard at it, not to deprive myself. But I don't know, without the things that happened to me in my life, I don't know that I would have become the person that I am today, the fuller, more authentic, communicative, healthier version of myself. I don't know that I would have. That would have been sad.
Well, the question on my mind, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to come out of my mouth, but the question was it worth it?
So it's really hard to hear for people who are in early stages of this.
Mm-hmm.
But heck yeah, it was worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got pushed to redefine who I am. I had to stop living for everybody else.
Mm.
Because in reality, when I looked at it, I wasn't doing a very good job of that either. I just thought I was. I have a marriage that I never dreamed I could have. I thought it was good. Then when I realized what was happening, I realized how much of it I was holding up, how much of it I was creating in my head to keep myself going. And now that James and I are on the other side, I just feel so thankful and so grateful for the journeys that we both have been through. And by the grace of God, we are so close to being what we want to be. If I ever say we are what we want to be, then you need to kick me under the table, because that
Okay, I promise. How's that?
might be telling a lie. If you see my nose growing, you will know I'm telling a lie.
Good to know.
So was it terrible? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Were there days I didn't think that I could go on? Yes. Were there days that I knew I didn't want to go on with him? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Were there also moments of grace? Yes. Have I met amazing people along the way? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And did we fight tooth and nail for something that was so worth it? Yes, 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 yes.
Mm-hmm. One of the earliest statements I remember hearing you make about your relationship was that you held a safe and sacred space for your marriage. It wasn't fixed on day 1 or day 10 or day 100, but you didn't push stop. You didn't call it over. You held time and space and emotion and opportunity and gave it every possible opportunity to grow into what you believed at some core of your being was possible.
Mm-hmm. I did. And I knew that if I stopped believing that it was possible, I would know when that time was, and I would no longer hold that safe space.
Yeah. And I will say, for every single human being I have met whose relationship hasn't survived betrayal, there has been a moment or a cumulative series of moments, but there has been that irrefutable awareness that this is it.
Yes.
This is where this story ends. This is where this chapter ends. This is where this part stops. And so I always say, if you don't feel that, you're not there.
Right.
That just is
right.
what it is.
And if you feel that and you feel it for a day and then you feel the opposite, that's not it.
I remember someone saying once, when you don't change your mind for an extended period of time, that's a good cue. I have one last question I want to ask you on this one, Sharon. You mentioned those days when it was so horrible and it was so unclear and it was just messy and miserable. What kept you going through the hard days when everything in you was screaming that it wasn't worth it?
Prayer, my faith that things were going to get better and that God had a plan, even though I didn't like how he was laying it out for me. Like, I really wanted to be in charge of it. And he kept saying, you're just not. But I'm pretty bossy. So I thought maybe I could convince him that I was. But anyway, faith, prayer, the conversations that I had with myself and God as I was moving forward, those things saved me. I had a fantastic therapist. I did EMDR with another fantastic therapist. My best friends, boy, they could step in and carry me when I needed it. I made sure to get a lot of sleep. I'm going to say that I was a therapist before and I stopped seeing people because I really wanted to not only focus on myself, but insulate other people from me. Because if I wasn't being able to boss my own life the way I wanted to, I might have bossed other people's lives. And that would not have been helpful. Just being in the moment, being present for my children and loving every minute that I got to spend with them, and really honoring what I needed in the moment. I chose whether I saw James or not. Even if we had plans, I was really in charge of how I felt in the moment and created pretty strong boundaries for our interactions. And that is a topic for another time.
It sounds like you did a beautiful job of holding on to your voice and your choice in this situation. And as we know, that is one of the things that is so instrumental to healing from trauma.
I agree. Next week, or actually it'll be in 2 weeks, because next week y'all are going to watch As the Unfaithful, and I can't remember what James and Sam have in store for next week, but I'm sure it'll be really good. And then you can watch us talk about the third phase, which is
reconnection and post-traumatic growth. So that third stage of healing from trauma, that part of who do we become and what choices do we make, what lives do we live after the world stops spinning and after we've gone through all of those waves of loss, grief, and mourning. And it's the rainbow that we see through the clouds on the other side.
Mm-hmm. That will be a great topic for us to talk about. If you like us, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to comment, please do. You can email us at askthebetrayed@gmail.com. please know that we cannot do therapy via email, but we're going to read everything. Please give us topics that you might be interested in. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay.
Thank you.